All right, so welcome everybody, and thank you for joining Network Partners for this Brunch and Learn, the Great Extension, a closer look at the EU MDR delay. A few quick housekeeping items to address. We ask that you please mute yourselves once you've joined, and a colleague is going to be actively patrolling participants just to ensure that everybody's manually muted as needed. And we ask that you address all of your questions via the question feature for a Q&A at the end. And then lastly, this webinar is recorded, and you're going to receive the recorded presentation as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint itself. So without further ado, Network Partners' Director of Regulatory Policy and Education, Nicholas Werner.
Thank you, Renee. Really appreciate that. And thank you to everybody for taking some time today to call in and listen into our talk. I also do want to say off the bat that I hope everybody is staying safe and healthy and making the most of these uncertain times. But thanks again for joining. So like Renee said, today's talk is going to be on the Great Extension, a closer look at the EU MDR delay. So a quick overview of our agenda for today. So I'm going to start with a little bit about me, why I'm talking to you. Then we'll go through the current state of the proposal for the delay. We'll get into the actual details of the full proposal, and then we'll go through some additional considerations after we discuss the details, and then allow a little bit of time for questions at the end. So to start, my name is Nicholas Werner. I am the Director of Regulatory Policy and Education here at Network Partners. I started my career with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, spent about 6.5 years there doing both pre-market and post-market work for the agency. After that, I moved into industry with Stryker Instruments, where I served in a total product lifecycle regulatory affairs role, and that served primarily for the U.S. and the EU. Following a couple of years there, I moved into Network Partners and have held a number of opportunities here. I've had a number of opportunities related to MDR, whether it be working through some of the policy behind everything or actual implementation. And I'm very excited to talk to you today about MDR and about the delay that we've all been waiting for quite a while now. So jumping right into it, so the current state of everything. So there's been a couple of recent activities that I want to make sure that we talked about. So April 3rd, so earlier this month, the proposal for the delay was made by the EU Commission. I feel like at that point, a lot of people thought it was done, it was certain. There's still a few more steps in the process after that. So the proposal was sent to the Parliament after it was proposed by the Commission. So it was sent to the Parliament for approval. And then just last Friday on the 17th, the Parliament did vote to approve. And it was a near unanimous approval. I think there was one vote against and a couple of abstentions. But other than that, everybody voted in approval for it. I do want to note that there were a few minor changes that were made between the initial proposal for the delay and then the time that it was actually approved through Parliament. We will go through what those are and just make sure that you're all aware of any minor details that may have changed. Last note here, despite what we may see across the industry right now, this is still not officially approved as of today. While it's likely to occur, it still is not actually a delay yet. So getting into when it will be official, we're going to talk about a few next steps here. So the next step after getting through Parliament is that it actually does have to be approved by the EU Council. What helps there is that the Council has already essentially given a written agreement to the proposal, so they just have to formally give the approval now. And then this type of legislation also requires consultation with the European Economic and Social Committee, and that committee themselves have also written a position paper that's in agreement. They do have a couple of caveats, but that should not impact any of this. And then there's also consultation needs to occur with the Committee of the Regions. All of this is anticipated to occur prior to the 26th of May, so just hang on tight, it will happen. But until all that happens and then it's finally published in the official journal, this is not an official delay, but all signs and everything is moving towards that. It's just a matter of waiting it out at this point. So I hope you're all very patient. I guess you all have been for the past couple of years anyway. All right, so now we're going to jump into the actual details of the proposal. So in the top right corner of all the slides moving forward, you'll see a box with a number in it. So if this one's 1, that's just to sort of help correlate, because I may jump a little bit back and forth between the actual points. So that correlates with the number of the actual in the proposal, which number of the proposal it is. So I think there was 9 specific points that were made, 9 changes that may have had multiple subpoints, but there's 9 specific changes that were made, and I just wanted to make sure that we outline where in the pecking order we are for those. So the first change was a change to Article 1, which has subject matter and scope of MDR, and specifically we're talking here at Article 1.2, which is common specifications. This is a relatively minor change. All they've done here is just make note of the change of date of application from May 2020 to make sure that the common specifications shall be adopted by the 26th of May 2021. Again, they're going to enter into force from that date or from when they're actually finished. So we know of 2 right now that they're working on. So we'll talk in the next slide about the single-use devices and reprocessing, and then the other would be devices without an intended medical purpose. So for Article 17, where the second change has occurred, we're talking the single-use devices and the reprocessing. And here we have Article 17.5, and this is talking about how the Commission shall adopt. So this is essentially, there's a lot of changes that are just making sure the consistency appears across the entire regulation. So Article 9.1 is the common specifications within EU MDR and whole. That's where they define what they are and how they're to be approved. And then they talk about here, and they talk about point B of paragraph 3. What that's referencing is that the reprocessing is actually performed in accordance with the common spec and detail the specific requirements that they outline for reprocessing. Again, any changes made in this section are only to the dates to reflect the new date of application of May 2021. So there's no actual textual change other than that in here. Everything will remain the same with the specifications and what they're requiring. The next big thing would be UNIMED, and specifically Article 34 that outlines the functionality of UNIMED. Again, what they changed here was to coincide with the new date of application, saying that UNIMED should be fully functional at a date that allows them to officially publish that notification that it's fully functional by the 25th of March 2021. This was changed from May 25th, 2020, but as I'm sure we're all aware at this point, there already has been a formalized delay of UNIMED until 2022, but we'll get into what that might mean in just a couple of slides. But so this is just a minor detail change here, changing the date to make sure that it's consistent. And now I'm going to jump to the 8th point because this is specifically to align with the UNIMED change itself. And this is Article 123.3b, talking about the entry into force and date of application. So this is essentially saying, and this was actually already used because this originally said that if UNIMED was not functional on the 26th of May 2020, and the Commission essentially has already said there was no way that UNIMED would be fully functional by May 26, 2020. This is the caveat of the regulation that gave me the ability to push that back even further. So now they've changed the date on which UNIMED could be fully functional to the 26th of May 2021. But again, the Commission has already stated that the date of UNIMED being fully functional will coincide with the IVDR in May of 2022. So jumping back onto that, so what is the current state of UNIMED? Again, from the Commission's webpage on UNIMED, they have not updated this yet. So all signs from the Commission are pointing to the fact that UNIMED will be launched together with medical and IVDs at the original date of the IVD regulation coming into, or the date of application for the IVD regulation on May of 2022. With this pushback, though, of the date of application for MDR, they still technically could move that date back to 2021 to coincide with the launch of MDR. I don't think they will. There's even no indication that they will do that, but that has been a rumor that's been floating around for a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that that was noted, that they still reserve that right to move that date because it's not official until it's published, and they could publish the UNIMED notification in 2021 if they so chose to. But again, I would imagine they would give a ton of heads up on that. And right now, everything the Commission has put out is still reflecting the May of 2022 date.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
Hey, sorry, it's Renee here. I'm going to jump in really quickly. Your audio is kind of spotty, Is your
Okay.
computer audio on by any chance?
My computer audio is not on.
Uh-oh. Okay. Do you mind maybe trying to plug in directly to the computer? Let's just go ahead and try that. We're getting quite a bit of like bubbles and pops.
Okay, let me try that real quick. I'm gonna have to exit out of my shared screen real quick.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, can you try now?
Okay, can you hear me?
Sorry, say a little bit more. Maybe talk a little bit more. Let's see.
Okay, can you hear me better this way?
Yes, so much better. Thank you.
Okay.
I apologize for interrupting.
No. It's much better that you can hear me than for me just to talk to myself for us.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself now. Keep going. We're good. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies to everybody for that. I hope everything was still somewhat clear at that point, but we're through UNIMED now, and I think I went through all the details on that. So moving on to Article 59, and this is kind of a big one, especially for the times that we're in right now. Article 59 is the derogation from the conformity assessment procedure for MDR. And what's important about this is the fact that the modification made here allows Article 59 to come into effect as soon as this proposal is published and finalized, up until the date of application in 2021. And what's interesting about that is this is the way in which devices can be brought to market in the EU without going through the normal conformity assessment procedures. So while not being identical, in my mind, I liken this to, if you're more familiar with FDA's sort of emergency use authorizations, and that products don't have to go through the normal types of procedures in order to be brought to market because there's some sort of emergency need or some extraordinary circumstance in which we know we would need these devices and we don't have the time to waste to go through the normal procedures. So what they've done, and this will come in a couple parts here. So the first is they've modified the first paragraph of Article 59 to state that starting as soon as this is into force, i.e. the date in which this is published in the official journal, you can now start using Article 59. Now, using that in conjunction with the second point here, so the member states right now under MDD do this individually. So each member state can sort of impose this rule under MDD, but it's only specific to the member states, and there's no requirement to notify the commission, or there's no need to notify the commission on what's going on there. And the second point here, now the member states, if they've taken this authority under MDD or AIMD, so you can see this down here when they talk about directives, the Article 9.9 of MDD or Article 11.13, I'm sorry, Article 9.9 of AIMD, and then Article 11.13 of MDD, sorry, Article 9.9 is for AIMD. These are the same types of procedures that are currently in place for bringing products to market without going through normal conformity assessments. Now they're saying if you do that, you may inform the commission. So they're basically recommending that you do inform the commission if you're still going to, in this interim period, still bring products to the EU market via this derogation from conformity assessment procedure. Now, with this third point here, this is the big one. This is basically what is changing from MDD and AMD to MDR, is that in MDR, under the normal Article 59 circumstances, the commission itself can take what any member state actually publishes themselves. If they say they bring a product through this in that member state, the commission can say, that's great, we think that's a great idea. We're going to now make that national, we're going to make that across the union. So now all member states, anybody participating in MDR can now utilize the same product without having to do it themselves within their own member states. And now they now have the authority to extend these authorizations that have been granted by any individual member state. And this will occur, this ability will happen as soon as this proposal is official. And then it also allows them to take any notifications that were received under MDD or AIMD prior to this being official, and actually also extending those. So and then one more point here. I'm going to jump back into trying to discuss more of the details on that in the next slide. But there's a couple of additional things here that have been made for consistency. So in order to make this consistent across the regulation, they've had to modify the entry into force and date of application. Basically, they've added a sub-bullet there, 123.3J, basically saying that Article 59 shall now apply from the date in which this is entered into force. So once this is published in the official journal, Article 59 can now apply. And then they've also had to remove for Article 122 for the repeal. They're now saying that those same powers that I just discussed for MDD or AIMD are now being removed as soon as this is entered into force, which means that once we have this proposal, once this amendment to MDR is in place, all of these derogations from conformity assessment things will go through MDR now, regardless of the status of the product, whether it's still under MDD, AIMD, or MDR. And this is a good thing because it gives the Commission the power now to take all of these actions union-wide rather than just doing it member state by member state. So to quickly summarize what I was trying to explain there is that now the Commission is allowed to apply Article 59 before the date of application. So before May 26, 2021, these actions may be taken as soon as this proposal is published. And what this allows the Commission to do is to take union-wide actions on these authorizations, where they can extend a single member state action to the whole union. And then this will allow them the ability to standardize measures across the union, so certain member states aren't getting certain products where they may be applicable across all member states. And what's useful here, like we were talking about right now, with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, this is going to be incredibly helpful, and it's really going to boost the ability of the union to bring certain products to market without having to go through normal procedures, which could take a lot of time and resources to do. All right, so moving on, this one's a little simpler to explain. This is a very simple update that just reflects the delay made, and it's actually only applicable to member states, so this is not something that's going to apply to manufacturers. This is just that member states have the requirement to essentially establish rules and on penalties that are applicable for any infringements here, and just making sure that they have effective dates on their penalties. Again, this is moved just the 25th of February 2021 instead of 2020. Just a pretty straightforward update here. Now we're going to get back into some more of the complexity here. So Article 120, which is the transitional provisions, and this is an important one, and I know I was interested to see how this would be handled. So the first point, so this is just a simple date of application update. This is essentially saying that as of the new date of application, May of 2021, notified bodies can no longer issue certs for MDD or AIMD. That's pretty simple, straightforward. I think that's to be expected. Apologies in advance. There's a lot of text on this slide, and there's probably a lot of text on some of the other slides, but I did want to capture this in context. So this was one of the saving graces that occurred prior to this amendment, and that this was the section that was added in the second core addendum. So this allowed for any Class 1 up-classified products, so your Class 1Rs or otherwise up-classified Class 1 products that did not require notified body intervention under MDD and now require notified body intervention under MDR. This gave them the ability to utilize the entire transition period. And that was not in the original text of MDR. It was added in the second core addendum. And now they're further reflecting this is also still applicable up until May 26, 2021. So I'm going to go into a couple of details on this one because there's some things that I think should be noted here. A lot of people noticed that this actually was not included. So the modification to 120.3 was not even at all listed in the initial proposal by the Commission. This was added after it went to Parliament. So when you're reviewing, if you want to go back and review the actual official proposals, be aware that you may see more than one version of it depending on what you're looking at. Always refer to the one that was produced after Parliament approval, so that's after the April 17th date, because the original one you're looking at is not going to even include this proposal at all. But again, this is important because this allows your Class 1Rs and your otherwise unclassified Class 1 products to use that full transition period. Now, instead of the declaration of conformity being drawn up prior to May 26, 2021 or 2020, now your DOCs have to be drawn up prior to May 26, 2021 in order to utilize that full transition period for these types of products. So Article 120.4 talks about the, I guess this is more commonly referred to as the sell-off provision. Again, I would really note here, if you look at that last sentence, it's the sell-off period still ends on May 26, 2025. It has not been extended at all. So if your device is placed on the market legally placed on the market from May 26, 2021, you still have the ability to sell off that product as long as it's legally placed on the market. You can sell it off up until May 2025. But again, a big note here is there's no extra time for this provision. It's just been modified to reflect the new date of application. For 120.5, this is another pretty simple update. This is essentially saying that you can already put MDR compliant product on the market, since MDR has actually already been in effect for a little bit of time now. So they're just reflecting here to make sure that they're consistent with the date of application. All right, so Article 126. So this 120.6, clarify. So this is essentially saying that notified body designations can occur prior to the new date of application. Obviously, this already applies because you already have notified bodies that are designated. Again, this is just modified to be consistent across the entire regulation. This is another one where I would note that there was a very minor change from the initial proposal from the Commission from the time it got to Parliament until it was finally approved through Parliament. Initially, it was just a change in dates, whereas when Parliament got it, it was now basically an entire replacement of the paragraph. And this was only done because this part of this provision was only added in as part of the first corrigendum. So they wanted to make sure that when this final text is published, it's a little bit more clean, a little bit more clear. They're going to remove the designation where it would say, you know, it would have the one designation, and then you would have to try to figure out, okay, that was added in the first corrigendum, here's what changed. Now they've stricken all of that, they've just replaced the entire paragraph as part of the amendment. It'll be much more clean. So Article 120.10, again, this is a minor change. So they essentially just replaced the entire paragraph and then modified the date for which you can put these types of products on the market. So to clarify, so for, with point G of Article 1.6 is actually referencing devices that are manufactured utilizing derivatives of tissues or cells of human origin, and these are non-viable or rendered non-viable. Again, I don't want to dig into the details of what that means, but just note that they have modified the date for consistency. And then from the time that the initial proposal came from the Commission to when it was gone through Parliament, the actual proposal was modified to replace the whole paragraph rather than do the piecemeal replace by date, because this was another one that was added in the first corrigendum. So again, just for clarity, make sure you're looking at the most recent official proposal, the one that went through Parliament, so you have that all in line. Article 120.11, very simple update, just incorporates the new date of application as it pertains to clinical investigations. Clinical investigations that have started now prior to the new date of application. So if you started your investigation prior to May 26, 2021, you can continue to conduct those. They would just still note that the new requirements around reporting of the serious adverse events and device deficiencies do need to be in accordance with the new regulation. But again, simple update, just wanted to make sure that it aligned with the new date of application. All right, so now we're moving on. We discussed a couple of changes already to Article 123. There are a few more, and this is specifically pertaining to entry into force and date of application. So very specifically, point 2 of this section is the date of application has changed from May 26, 2020 to 2021. So that obviously has been made there. And then we've also are talking about the ability here. So this is Articles 35 to 50. Here they're referencing are the requirements related to notified bodies. And this is a very straightforward clarification. This is already saying that these requirements only apply if you've already been designated as a notified body under MDR. So this is just a quick clarification to say that we're modifying that date of application to May 2021. So UDI, so this is an interesting one here, and I'll get into why that's interesting in just a second. But just first, so this point G, in itself, actually, there's no change at all to what it actually already said in MDR initially. They've just updated this for clarity, where now it specifically spells out the dates for any reusable devices. So we're talking about reusables here, and that reusables require a UDI to be on the product itself, and they basically just spelled out what those specific dates are. If they've only updated that for clarity, there's no modification otherwise. Now, what is interesting is the initial proposal from the commission actually made a change to point F, and point F is the actual dates for when UDI applies otherwise, when it's not considered a reusable product. And what was found in the review from Parliament was that they thought that that actually unintentionally modified some of the dates that UDI would be applicable. So they actually just struck that entire proposed change altogether and reverted back to point F as it currently is listed, or as the current text reads in MDR. So to summarize, UDI dates have not changed at all. So that means now that UDI for implantables and class 3 devices is now at date of application on that May 26, 2021 date. The other dates also have not changed. So from date of application, you've only got 2 years for the 2B and 2A, and then 2 more years for your class 1s. And then essentially adding on an additional 2 years per class if it is a reusable product. All right, so the last change here, so the ninth change was to Annex 9, and this is the conformity assessment procedures based on quality management system and assessment of technical documentation. This is a pretty minor change, does not necessarily apply to manufacturers. It does apply to the commission itself and technically member states, essentially changing the date when they talk about these expert panels. Initially, they needed to have that guidance in place by May 26, 2020. They're now modifying that just to align with the new 2021 date. And just for clarity, the point C they're discussing here is about the criteria on whether the expert panel should be providing a scientific opinion on a clinical evaluation assessment, and it's only applicable to class 3 implantables and 2B actives that deal with medicinal products. Again, not applicable to manufacturers, but this is something the commission and member states will have to work out. So we've gone through all of the changes, and please feel free to ask questions if anything was unclear and was broken up while I was trying to discuss those. I did want to get into some additional considerations here while I still have a few minutes. Some things that we don't really know the answer to yet, and something that could have a major impact on industry as we move forward with the delay. Is the big one for me is what's unknown still about how notified bodies are going to react. What we've seen so far is with the 2020 date in play, we've seen their priorities had shifted to trying to make sure they get through as many extensions and recertifications, early renewals. That was where the priority was lying, not necessarily on any MDR certifications at that point. So now that we've got an extra year in here for them being able to provide that service while MDR is not technically applicable, I would be interested to see if they're going to shift any of that, if they're going to start to focus more on seeing if they can sort of prevent that backlog later by working more on MDR products now. But I think that's also going to pertain to, or That's also going to be impacted by whether or not industry is going to shift and try to get through more MDR products earlier, even if the date has been pushed back. A lot of notified bodies had also set dates that have long since expired for when they would even review changes to existing products, or changes that could trip a product through MDR, or any changes, any recertifications, any early renewals. They gave final dates on those a while ago, and I'd be interested to see, will be interested to see on how they're going to change moving forward now that they've got the extra year. Will they push those deadlines out further? Will they continue to allow extensions or early renewals as they move closer to 2021? So that's something we're going to have to wait to hear from the notified bodies. And then the last thing, I guess, would be how many are going to exist prior to the new date of application. I think the industry is really focused on that too, because we have 12 right now, but I imagine all of them are pretty slammed and are having trouble keeping up with all the renewals, and then new companies coming in and trying to get new products, whether they be MDR compliant or still under MDD. The more notified bodies we have moving towards closer to the date of application, the better off we're going to be. But I don't think we've seen a new one in over a month now, and I know that things have been slowing down a lot lately, just with everything going on with the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how many are actually certified notified bodies come May 2021. Another point here I want to note, and this is a big one, is that the transition period has not been extended at all. All MDD and AIMD certificates will be void on May 27th, 2024. That is the exact same date prior to this extension. So even if you think there's more time initially, there's not more time for the. We've already got that plan in place for which products you're going to convert to MDR first, and maybe you thought that this would give you more time on the products that require notified body intervention. It really doesn't. We're going to start seeing backlogs toward the end. Every manufacturer starts pushing all of their MDR certifications towards the end. So now is not the time to slow down. Now is the time to ramp up and make sure that you can take advantage of the transition period as it exists currently, treat it as if it were exactly the same, and don't take this delay in date of application as giving you any more time for products that require notified bodies to weigh in. That being said, it does help with the simple class ones that did not require that. Those don't need to be compliant now until May 2021. So that's great and that's beneficial, but don't let that work slip until right before date of application 2021, when you then got other products that may need to have a lot more focus because you're already a year in to what the transition period was initially. And then also note that the classified class ones that we discussed, those also can be placed on the market until the end of the transition period of May 26, 2024. But again, you need that declaration of conformity to be signed and in place prior to the 2021 date of application. And then I did note before that the sell-off period, so that extension sort of from as long as it's placed on the market prior to the May 26, 2024 date, those can be sold off until 2025, but that remains the same. There's no additional time to sort of work on stockpiling or anything like that. And then just a couple of things that I'm going to be watching for that I think would be helpful for all of industry to keep watching for. The first one would be the Commission's rolling plan updates. We haven't seen an update to the rolling plan since December. And what this plan does, it outlines all the Commission's priorities and timelines for all their essential implementing acts and actions. I would imagine that we'd be seeing an update to this hopefully soon, now that we know that the extension is coming. There will be a delay. I would be really interested to see if that impacts any of their priorities, or at least allows them to sort of lay out a more clear time frame as we get closer to the 2021 date now. I'm not sure if any priorities will be changing, but it would be great to see if we had more specifics on the timing of everything coming out. So, I think that the rolling plan will be updated somewhat soon. The second thing is the MDCG, the Joint Implementation Preparedness Plan. They issued this just last month in March, and this was right before we started hearing all of the delay being firm and everything else, with everything else coming along the way. This will likely need to be updated. They outlined that the Commission and member state plan to be prepared by May 2020, but now since we're assuming that date will now be May 2021, they're going to probably have to update that to make sure that we have the preparedness plan in place for May 2021. And again, just like with the rolling plan, I would be interested in seeing what the Commission and the member states jointly are saying they need to do now to make sure that we're all prepared come May 2021. So that's another thing that I'm going to be looking out for in the coming months. There's a lot of additional MDCG guidance that's been in the works for a while and more to come. And, you know, I think now that they have more time, I think we'll be seeing more guidance prior to the date of application, which is going to be beneficial in the long run. But I'm also interested to see if there's any more temporary measures that they're going to take. I think we've seen the new audits guidance that came out about how to conduct audits remotely, or which audits could be delayed or not happening right now because of the social distancing that we need to be taking right now. So, you know, I do wonder if there's any additional temporary measures that they might put into place that hadn't been thought of before. I would expect to see that either in the rolling plan or in the new preparedness plan if they do start launching that. And then lastly, harmonized standards. You know, I haven't talked about these in a while. I haven't heard a lot about these in a while. But there was a draft standardization request put out quite a while ago. I'm interested to see if there's going to be any modifications to the request as far as which standards will be imperative, what should the timeline be on those standards, and then can we expect more standards to be harmonized prior to the May 2021 date? And if we do, you know, do companies have procedures in place so that they're capturing which standards are harmonized? Do they have the adequate procedures in place to capture that and then incorporate that into all of their documentation, especially the GSPRs, making sure that we're referencing the correct documents, the correct standard, if it was harmonized at a time that we might not thought it was possible before. So I'm really hoping that this extension does allow for a lot more harmonized standards. I think that'll make things easier on everyone. But again, I can't force that. I can't predict when that's going to happen. I'm just very hopeful that it will. And then I did include in here, I'm going to send out a couple of references for you to include, or for you to review. We'll have the full text of the proposals, some of the opinions that were mentioned, the UNIMED webpage. If there's anything else that I'm missing, feel free to reach out. I can make sure I can get you any other documentation. But for now, I will leave it at that, and I will open it up if anybody has any questions. And thank you all again for your time today.
All right, good job. Thank you, Nick. So you have a few questions here. And then again, as people are having questions, feel free to submit them via the chat feature. The first one is, great presentation, Nick. I have a question about using the changed laws. Specifically, Article 59 will start as soon as the delay is published. Can you talk more about the process of applying for access under Article 59?
Sure. So I'm not fully familiar with the procedures in place there. They do, from my understanding, they'll vary by member state. I don't know what official procedures are in place, but if you want to reach out by email, that's something that I can definitely do a little more digging on to make sure that I'm not just giving some sort of random answer here, and make sure we can actually get you the right information on that process as it currently exists. I'm not sure how much work has already gone into defining the new process, but since it is similar to the process that's already in place for MDD and AIMD, I'm sure there's some familiarity with how it works currently. But please, Renee, if you can get me that by email, then we can respond as well.
Okay. The next one is, you may have answered it, but can new products be submitted under MDD until May 26th, 2021?
So that is wholly dependent on your notified body. And this is what I was trying to allude to when I mentioned that all notified bodies have been putting out dates to which that would be the last date in which they'll accept an application for a new certification or a modification to an existing cert. So that's going to vary dependent on notified body and their capacity. If you do have questions on that, I highly recommend reaching out as soon as possible to your notified body and see if they intend to modify the dates in which they would accept new applications at this point.
All right. And then another is, do you think more notified bodies will be designated as time goes on? I know you said the last one you saw was over a month ago, but now due to the extension, do you anticipate more?
I do. I do anticipate more. I can't comment on how many, but I'm sure that there have been a lot that are already fairly far along in the process of getting designated by the commission. So it's just a matter of time and how long that'll take. I'm sure things are sort of being thrown through a loop right now with the inability to do on-site auditing. But I know that there's probably quite a few that have already gone through a majority of this process and you're either waiting designation or answering the last round of questions with the commission. So there will be more. I don't know how many more. I imagine that there's going to be a bit of a delay still throughout the rest of the summer, just because of everything going on with the pandemic. But yes, anticipate more to come.
Okay, another user says, great information. Does this change affect in a company with an MDD certificate expiring in Q1 of 2021? Is it possible or likely to get an extension from the notified body?
Yeah, I would say it's possible. I'm going to go back to my previous statement of definitely reach out as soon as possible to your notified body and see where they stand on this. You know, I didn't mention that, but that's a very good point that there is that, there are those few, I hope that there are few products that do have that expiration of their certificates occurring between May 26, 2020 and the 2021 date. And, you know, depending on where the company is, if you've already got most of what you need in place to apply for MDR at this point, I would highly recommend just going full steam ahead and getting MDR if you're ready for it. There's no need to delay right now for that, because I know if all companies start doing that, there's going to be a huge backlog amongst notified bodies. And again, with the transition period not being delayed at all, we're going to start seeing that backlog towards the end. But if you do work with your notified body, reach out to them. If it's Q1 of 2020, or sorry, if it's Q1 of 2021, I imagine they'll be much more open to an extension. Again, depending on where their priorities have shifted or if they have not shifted at all, they'll probably be more willing to discuss. So please reach out, talk to them, they'll be able to answer that.
All right, and then last one is just an FYI from a user who says that their notified body who is designated under the MDR stated that they will accept extensions to scope for MDD on a case-by-case basis through May of 2021. So that's good to know.
That is great to know. Thank you to that user for providing that information. So that does help, that we know at least one notified body is definitely open to continue to extend certs. You know, I think it's going to make it easier on themselves if they can, especially if it's early on in 2021 when that's expiring. But at least we have one data point showing that it can occur. So that's great. Thank you.
And then I think this may be the last question. Do the requirements such as PMS, which were set to go into effect on May 26th, 2020, now get extended to May 26th, 2021?
Great question. I definitely should have covered that. I intended to, but yes, the answer is yes. Those requirements, the market surveillance, post-market surveillance, anything that was supposed to kick in among those on the date of application for 2020 will now be extended to the May 26, 2021 date. So yes, that is a great question.
All right, it looks like we have no other questions. As always, if you do have any questions on any of this, you can reach out to myself, Renee Miller, or you can reach out to Nicholas Werner. You will be getting this recorded webinar again, as well as the PDF. And to ensure that you're learning about future Brunch and Learns, we ask that you follow us on LinkedIn. Also, during this time, I strongly suggest that you connect with Nicholas Werner directly on LinkedIn, as he is the subject matter expert on all of this. And we thank you again for your time, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.